you're well represented up here in that it's important for you to be engaged personally, which you are doing that by your presence here, but also to make sure you have high caliber representation. You have that, but there are a lot of moving parts up here, and it's often said if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Sometimes it happens both, but you know, you're to be applauded for taking an active part in what's going on in the state, as it will impact you some way or another. I appreciate what you do as an industry. You actually try to get things done in spite of the legislature, and you're to be commended for that. We try not to get in the way, but we can't help ourselves. And when I say we, that's the corporate we, because usually I'm fighting to lower the scope of government and help you get out and do the things that you like to do best. To that point, as Dave mentioned, this week the governor will release his May revision of the budget. And you remember just a few years ago, there was this little tax called Prop 30, and it was called this temporary tax. And, you know, temporary is a very interesting term of art up here. Hardly anything is temporary once it's started. But we complained that it would be generating $7 or $8 billion a year, and it would not be temporary. And sure enough, you know, it's generating that or more. And they're always trying to extend it. But we find ourselves with an embarrassing wealth of riches in that the governor presumed $8 billion more in revenue in his January budget, and we now believe there's another $8 billion on top of that. So we're looking at $16 billion more than last year's budget, and it's not enough. And there's never enough up here. So you still have people talking about extending Prop 30, and you have split roll property tax. That's always a very, you know, wonderful idea. That may even qualify for the ballot, which is a little more difficult to defeat there. You have Hertzberg's tax on services and other things, and whether or not that's a discussion starting point, who knows. And then we have Jim Bell's tax, 3 different taxes to fund transportation, but not all of it goes into transportation. And then you have the speaker's car fee, or $52, you know, for if you drive a car, it's $1 a week. And that doesn't all go into transportation either. So there's a lot of other taxes out there, but the point is, how much is enough? And I guess it goes back to what somebody asked J.D. Rockefeller back when he was the richest guy on the planet through oil. They asked him, how much money is enough? His answer was, a little bit more. That's the same philosophy you have here. There's never enough tax revenue, so it's frightening, and many of us in the room would like to see more revenue for our priorities. But as we get into making the sausage that's called legislation up here and budgeting, it's like, well, if I want to get $10 billion for transportation, we got to get $10 billion for something else. And so it's always give and take, and that's the art of trying to get things done, but in a way that's affordable and that we can move together. So it was encouraging, at least, that the governor in January, when he did his State of the State, talked about the need for infrastructure. And I think all of us in the room here would applaud that. Now, he lobbed that idea out, and it's something we all recognize, but he didn't offer any funding solutions. So out of that came the speaker's idea of $52 per vehicle, another fee on that. And out of that came Jim Bell, who's Senate Chairman of Transportation and Housing. He had 3 different taxes that he was proposing. But in our caucus, we came up with what we thought was, well, it is the consensus position for us is, here's a novel thought. How about taking anything being paid into transportation now and actually using it for transportation purposes? And that would generate $1 billion a year more for roads, bridges, and highways. So that became Senate Constitutional Amendment number 7, which I carried, but it's basically our caucus. And it closes a loophole that was never supposed to be there anyway. We have 175,000 miles of public roads. $59 billion worth of maintenance backlog is what the estimate is by Department of Finance. So that the Department of Finance is the governor's, you know, financial arm. 90% of California's counties have an average pavement rating of at risk or poor. And as you all know, if you don't take care of it when it's just a little bit bad, it becomes a lot bad and costs a lot more money to fix as you put it off. And during the economic downturn, it was easy to put those things off because we were having to make some very difficult decisions. And when you're having to cut $25 billion out of a budget or $36 billion or whatever it is we were trying to tackle whatever year, there are no easy decisions. And we did a lot of things. But now that the economy is coming back, it's time to get back to setting up a sustainable framework. And we do believe that actually keeping the money in transportation is a good start. Proposition 42 in 2002 passed, and it would dedicate taxes for transportation purposes. Now, didn't I just say that's what we're trying to do? Well, during the recession, we found a loophole on that, and so we borrowed the money because it didn't say you couldn't borrow it. So the voters spoke in 2010 with Prop 22 and said, okay, you can't borrow the money either. But there's a lot of creativity contained within a few block radius of the Capitol, and so they decided to take the truck weight fees and shift that because truck weight fees weren't presumed. Now, the trucks with 80,000 pounds gross weight are arguably doing the most damage to the roads, and you would think that money then ought to go back into repairing the roads. But because it wasn't specifically nailed down, they used that money and they diverted it, and that's still happening today. So since 2010, when we thought we nailed that loophole shut, there's been $5 billion that have flowed from truck weight fees to the general fund and haven't gone into fixing roads, bridges, or highways. So we hope that SCA 7 will stop that and get money back flowing. Additionally, as you get more economical vehicles that are fleet average now running about 24 miles per gallon, and we have a lot of the hybrids running around 40 to 50 miles per gallon. So because our taxes are primarily paid through fuel, then they're not paying as much as they used to, but we have more people on the roads and therefore more wear and tear. So these are some of the problems we have to fix. But in our Senate Republican caucus, we think the first thing you do is you nail shut transportation funds currently being diverted, but that also would nail shut future diversions as you're raising more money. And frankly, if we took a tax increase to the voters or a fee, whatever you want to call it, if they felt we're going to be disingenuous, as we have a couple times in the past, they're not going to open their pocketbooks. You've seen it in the local self-help counties when they raise sales tax to pay for transportation projects, when they're very specific, when it's regionally balanced, when people can see the need, they vote for it. If they don't believe you're being genuine, that you're going to divert the money or you're not going to spend it the way that they want it spent, they're not going to support it. I think the state taxpayers are the same way. And so that's why we want to make sure that through SCA 7, we actually nail that loophole shut. That gets us $1 billion more to start with, and then we can have that discussion about what's the most equitable way to help this funding the infrastructure necessary that we need for our existing usage.
Let me just, I really want to talk about the tax thing because I want to leave a couple of messages, but let me start by framing it in terms of my approach and perspective. You know, when I served in government some years ago, more than a dozen here I left, I formed the Business Democrats with my buddy Dennis Cardoza. And we did that because as Democrats, we like to spend money on a lot of stuff. But as a guy who spent his life as an entrepreneur and a business guy and done a heck of a lot of deals in the dirt business of various iterations, you got to make money to pay for the stuff. You can't just get out there and say the money comes out of thin air. You got to make money. And I know how to make money. Taken companies public before, been to over 100 and some countries in the last 12 years, traveling the world, working on my business endeavors, and have done that. And now I come back to government. And on day one, I introduced a tax bill. What stupid schmuck would do that? Right? And I did it for business reasons. I did it because it's the right thing to do. I did it because it came out of a bipartisan endeavor that looked at California and saw that the Titanic is sinking and we have to do something big about it. In our state budget during this last recession, 3.7% was the downturn in the economy. 24% was the down, $24 billion. I think the percentage, let me just double check my numbers that I got this morning on this to talk to you guys about. The downturn in the economy was 23% or $24 billion. You've got a management problem. You have a finance problem. How do you fix it? And the truth of the matter is that we have engaged in a bunch of very narrow, myopic self-interests, so each group protects their little piece of cheese on the earth and don't care about the common good. Well, my job in the legislature is to fight for the republic, to fight for the big picture, to fight for the future, to sometimes take some of my friends and get them a little upset in terms of what's going on, because at the end of the day, I'm trying to figure it out. And what happens, unfortunately, in this system, because we live in a place where we all have our little silos that we live in, we only focus on a little piece of the world. The accountants come up, don't even understand the bill. It's only intent language, and are complaining. I go, well, how come you're here not talking about foster care? How come you're not here about the cost of construction or building schools or whatever? They only care about that small universe. I'm not suggesting that they should care about everything, but what I'm trying to do in dealing with this big measure is to say, let's step back for a minute. Let's at least be honest that the ship is sinking and we have got to fix it. And so the notion of this measure, this SB 8 that Dave referred to, and I'm going to have an ask of everybody in this room, comes from a group of people called the Think Long Committee of California. It includes Democrats and Republicans. It includes the former Secretary of the Treasury and Secretary of State George Shultz, Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, Eric Schmidt from Google, includes Governor Davis, Willie Brown. It includes Laura Tyson, President Clinton's person who was the head of the Council of Economic Advisors. It includes people in all different industries. David Bonderman from Texas Pacific, if you know who he is, he owns a bunch of companies in your industry. And a lot of really bright people. Eli Broad, a bunch of folks. And the question was, irrespective of politics, how do you fix the problem? What do you do when we live in a globalized economy, and how do you fix the problem? And it's a comprehensive approach to tax policy that when you start out with problem solving, you don't look and say what constituency is going to like this and not like it, how to sell it, how to message it, which is what happens in politics. It's the reason why we have all of these cockamamie deals, because people go to the political industrial complex and say, I want money. They go poll something. Oh, here's what will work to manipulate the public, not what will work to solve societal problems or whatever, to get your $5 that you need to continue your revenue stream. Right? And that's what happens. Well, we stepped back and said, irrespective of politics, what's the best thing to do? And there's only two kinds of taxes that are not exportable in the global economy: consumption tax and property tax. That's it. Everything else moves. Markets move, money moves, everything else moves. Talk to all the economists. Alan Auerbach, Nobel laureate from Berkeley, is part of our deal. And so what we said in a nutshell was this. I know people are looking at the service tax. We already tax 32 services. 49 states already have service tax. But what it does is reduce the personal income tax significantly, because it's volatile and it just creates wild swings. And it gets people to want to leave. It will be going down dramatically under this proposal. 2, small businesses, a lot of the subcontractors that you guys use, if their net income is $1 million, their corporate tax liability under this plan is 0. Anybody who makes $100,000 or less, not anybody in this room, gets a tax reduction, excuse me, a tax reduction. We're looking to exempt a whole host of other services, not just health care and education, but child care and rents and a bunch of other things that deal with the normal human condition, if you will. And then the key thing about this is, what do you do with the money? In a sophisticated way, in the sophisticated audience, what basically happened with money is that all the money goes up to the state and it gets sucked up into the money machine of the state. All these new dollars, except for dedicated revenue streams to the University of California and the state university system, which are incredibly important engines to the economy, and the rest of the money is going local. It's going local to replace the money that was removed because of these downturns on the CRA, and enterprise zone stuff. It's going to be securitizable dollars, meaning you can borrow against it, you can build infrastructure with the money like we did with schools. The problem with California is that we have cash flow money and not investment money. It's like on a balance sheet. There's certain dollars on a bond issue you can only invest in capital costs. You can't invest in operating costs. So in 1978, when Prop 13 passed, we had a $6.5 billion surplus, and everybody says, use that money. Well, as soon as the money went away, it doesn't pay for continuing programs. And it creates this abnormal gyration in terms of how government works. It is critically important that you've got to recalibrate this system for the modern economy, number one. And number two, you've got to invest in the elements with the new money that actually work for this place. And we call it the Upward Mobility Act. Why? Because we're investing in infrastructure and higher education. That's where jobs happen. That's where money gets made. That's where the backbone of the economy gets built, both in the future and in the current time. This is not a service tax bill. This is a big rethink of trying to get out of the big crappy hole that we have lived in, and it's getting worse and worse. The legislative analyst just gave us a report in our caucus some weeks ago that said if we have a $4.4 billion surplus, we have a deficit. Now, how does that happen? It happens because under the law, Prop 98, there's what's called Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 test factors and how much money schools get. And it also happens because of the nature of the money that's coming in the door and how the rainy day fund works. So you've got money, but you have to have cuts in other parts of the government. It's gotten to the point of just being nuts. And so what we're trying to do in a bipartisan basis is to have the big think, to really figure out not just what to do about who the winners and losers are in tax revenue, but to really do it intelligently. And by intelligent means that we're not going to tax your subs so you get the cascading effect and you get taxed twice. If you're a sub to somebody and your bill's $5,000 and they bill the end user $10,000, you add the 5% on the back end and the bill's $10,500. We're going to require the bill to be displayed in our discussions at this point so that just like you have on sales tax for goods, that you're going to be able to show the bill's $10,000, $500 tax, $10,500, as opposed to forcing you to eat it in terms of how that works. It'll get passed on to the customer, and we've analyzed that in terms of what's called the incidence study. We're looking to reduce taxes on goods so that your contractors, your people that buy goods and pay taxes will pay less. This is a re-engineering, and is it difficult? Sure. But that's kind of like an in Sacramento back of the house discussion, what we're going to do at the end of the day. And we've got technology people. Our plan, if we can get it together, is to be able to just have one of these. And this will say, how much is my tax under the old rules and how much is my tax under the new rules? Because anytime you talk about tax and you're a rat-finged politician, nobody believes you. But they do believe. You like that rat-finged politician thing, huh? So that's the big picture. And my ask to you is, if you hear people, say the sky's falling, oh my God, this Hertzberg's got a sales tax bill and what's happening, they don't have all the other pieces. They don't really know, because I haven't released any of this stuff beyond talking in broad platitudes, because it takes a long time to figure out how this stuff really works. It's really, really, really tough. I just ask you to send the message that we're going to work on it. We're going to figure it out. I'm not doing anything stupid. This ultimately will go to the ballot. Not even if I don't want it to go to the ballot. The governor has said that any tax measure is going to be voted on the people. That's what he's done, and I set that standard. So it'll go to the ballot, even though I think it'll have to, because it'll have constitutional provisions. I'm not moving it on my committee anytime in the near future, despite the rumors that you hear all the time that it's moving and, oh my God, we've got to stop and organize. You got a rational person who's trying to fix a big problem on a bipartisan basis.
We are the sponsor of a stormwater bill, so Dave, I was going to just kind of shoot you a couple of bills and maybe you could update us on what's happening with them.
Maybe some of you last evening met Assemblyman Luis Alejo, who was here. He's the author of our stormwater bill. He represents the area down in Salinas and Monterey. He also chairs the Legislative Latino Caucus, which is important for us because that brings votes with him when he authors a bill for us, and that's an important aspect for us. What this bill very simply does, it requires public agencies to prepare the stormwater plan and then submit that plan as a part of the bid they submit to you to return to them as a bid for the whole project. Sounds very simple on the surface. We now have opposition from virtually every public agency in California on the bill, and we got through with a unanimous vote in local government committee, which is their committee, so to speak. So we got out with Brian Mainshine, who's the chair of the committee, with his support for the bill, and we're now in Appropriations Committee for a hearing scheduled on May 20th.
Very good. I think that's making headway. Seems like there's been an awful lot of emails on the prevailing wage with the ready mix drivers, or I don't know if it's now ready mix and asphalt, or whether that's going to change. But boy, that's got a lot of people concerned. What's happening?
Well, the Teamsters are the sponsor of legislation to expand prevailing wage to cover ready-mix drivers. The bill currently also includes asphalt, but the authors told us he's going to amend asphalt out. And we heard last night that apparently they're going to completely gut everything that's in the bill, recast the bill, and formulate it in a different manner. It will still ultimately require prevailing wage on ready-mix drivers. Well, if it's ready-mix drivers, is it next asphalt after that? Sand, gravel, aggregate, and the like? How about other material supplies on public works jobs? That's one of our principal concerns. Labor is engaging with us on some of their concerns, how it will work. Again, the building trades and the Teamsters are the sponsors. Teamsters have been woefully short on being able to organize this field, and they think by applying prevailing wage will allow them to organize the cement industry to become Teamsters.
Assembly Bill 1347, prompt pay.
Yeah, this one, the original sponsors of this bill are the United Contractors. We worked with them last year on legislation that failed passage. We took a different approach this year with them to where last year it was the public agency was going to have to initiate a change order within a certain amount of time. We flipped the tide on them and said now a contractor who is being ordered to do changes to the contract can initiate payment requests.